The great seawall of New Seattle rose like a jagged gray spine against the horizon, holding back the Pacific Ocean with a stubborn, concrete refusal. It was the 24th of November, and the sky was the color of a bruised plum, threatening a storm that had been brewing since Tuesday. Down in the submerged districts, the pumps hummed their eternal, rhythmic lullaby, keeping the streets dry. But up here in the reclaimed zones, the air smelled of salt, ozone, and wet asphalt. But inside the kitchen of the Whispering Ladle Community Center, the air smelled like salvation. Adrian Locke stood over a stock pot that was large enough to bathe a toddler in. He was a man of 42 years, though his eyes carried the weight of a century. He wore a faded gray sweater with the sleeves pushed up to his elbows, revealing forearms scarred from years of handling hot iron and sharp steel. He was not a handsome man in the conventional sense. His face was too lined, his expression too often pulling toward a weary apology. But there was a warmth to him that drew people in like moths to a porch light. He adjusted the flame beneath the pot. This was the miracle soup. It was not magic, strictly speaking. It was pork bones roasted until they were the color of mahogany, simmered for 18 hours with star anise, ginger, charred onions, and a handful of herbs that Adrian grew in the hydroponic garden on the roof. 10 more minutes, he whispered to the broth. He skimmed the surface with a ladle, his movements precise and practiced. Just let the fats marry. The kitchen door swung open, and the rhythmic thrum of synthesized bass leaked in from the hallway. Mira Locke leaned against the door frame, her fingers tapping against her thigh, in time with the music blasting from her earbuds. At 16, she was a chaotic blend of sharp angles and soft edges. Wearing a jacket that seemed to be made entirely of patches and zippers, she pulled one earbud out. "Dad, Mrs. Gorski is arguing with Mr. Henderson about the table arrangements again. She says his stuffing is a biological hazard." Adrian sighed, wiping his hands on a towel. "Henderson puts too much sage in it. It's dry. But we don't say that out loud." "I told them you'd ban them both if they didn't chill," Mira said, walking over to the counter and stealing a slice of raw carrot. "Did I overstep?" "You are my diplomatic envoy," Adrian said, though a shadow flickered behind his eyes at the word diplomatic. He turned back to the soup. "Just keep them separated until the bowls go out. Once they eat, they'll be too busy being happy to fight." Mira hopped onto a stool, swinging her legs. "You know, people think you put drugs in this stuff. Legit. Tasha from the arcade says you're a wizard." "I am a cook, Mira. Wizards have better hours." Adrian tasted the broth. It was deep, rich, and coated the tongue with a savory comfort that felt like a heavy blanket on a cold night. It was perfect. "It's just patience, that's all the flavor is. Patience and heat." "Right, patience," Mira scoffed affectionately. "Is that why you hid in here when the mayor came by last week, because you were being patient?" "I wasn't hiding. I was observing critical kitchen protocols." "You hate the spotlight, Dad." "It's weird. You run the most popular spot in Sector 4, but you act like you're in witness protection." Adrian stiffened imperceptibly. He reached for the pepper grinder, giving it 3 sharp twists. "I just like my privacy, kiddo. Now, go tell Gorski that if she moves one more chair, she gets no bread rolls." Mira saluted mockingly and bounced out of the room. Adrian watched her go, the smile fading from his face as soon as the door clicked shut. He touched the pendant hidden beneath his sweater, a small, smooth piece of obsidian that wasn't actually stone. He hadn't told her. He hadn't told her about the stars he had seen, the treaties he had drafted in rooms lacking oxygen, or the woman named Rhea who had taught him that sound could be a weapon or a caress. He was just Adrian the cook. That was the only role that kept them safe. The back door to the alley opened with a rush of wind, and Elena Park blew in like a weather front. She was soaked, her raincoat dripping onto the linoleum. Elena was the emergency manager for New Seattle, a woman who treated catastrophes like items on a grocery list. She was sharp-featured, beautiful in a way that suggested steel reinforced with silk. And currently, she looked exhausted. "Tell me you have coffee," Elena said, leaning back against the door to close it against the gust. "Or whiskey, or soup, in that order." "Rough morning?" Adrian asked. He didn't ask her what she wanted. He simply reached for a clean bowl and began to ladle. "The sensor boys are acting up. We are getting ghost readings from the upper atmosphere. Probably just solar flares. But the council is panicking about the interference with the comms satellites," Elena said, peeling off her wet coat. Underneath, she wore her crisp uniform, though the collar was unbuttoned, betraying her fatigue. "And it's Thanksgiving. I should be at home pretending I know how to roast a turkey." Adrian slid the bowl across the stainless steel island toward her. The steam curled up, carrying the scent of roasted garlic and marrow. Elena closed her eyes and inhaled. "You are a lifesaver, Adrian," she murmured. She took a spoon and tasted it. Her shoulders dropped 2 inches instantly. "Okay. Maybe the sensor boys can wait 20 minutes. Eat," Adrian said softly, leaning his hip against the counter, watching her. There was a comfortable silence between them, the kind that had been built over 5 years of storms, power outages, and late-night meals. He cared for her. He suspected she knew it. But there was a line he refused to cross, a wall he had built out of his own broken history. "You know," Elena said, blowing on a spoonful. "The mayor asked about you again. He wants to give you that citation for the relief work during the flood last year." "No," Adrian said immediately. "Adrian, it's a piece of paper and a handshake. You don't have to give a speech." "I don't want my face on the news. Elena." She looked at him, her dark eyes searching his face. "Why are you secretly an intergalactic criminal?" She meant it as a joke, but the spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Adrian forced a chuckle. "Worse, I owe money to the IRS from 1999. Elena didn't laugh. She put the spoon down. "One day, you are going to have to let someone in. Adrian. You can't just feed the world and starve yourself." Before Adrian could answer, before he could deflect with another joke about seasoning, the building shook. It wasn't an earthquake. New Seattle was built on dampeners. Earthquakes felt like a gentle sway. This was a vibration that rattled the teeth in their skulls. The pots, hanging from the rack, clattered violently. "What was that?" Adrian asked, his voice losing its softness. Elena was already tapping her wristcom. "Seismic impact, no. It came from above." Then the sirens began. Not the flood sirens, which were a low, mournful wail. These were the civil defense sirens, a jagged, screaming staccato that hadn't been tested at full volume in a decade. "Mira," Adrian said, the name tearing out of his throat. He abandoned the soup and ran for the door. Elena closed on his heels. They burst into the main hall of the community center. The 50 or so people who had gathered early for the feast were frozen, looking up at the skylights. The sky had torn open, through the reinforced glass. Adrian saw the clouds part, not by wind, but by displacement. Massive, angular shapes were descending through the atmosphere, burning orange with re-entry heat. They were not sleek, aerodynamic ships. They were brutal, jagged constructs of dark metal, resembling arrowheads made of obsidian and hate. "Fenrir," Adrian breathed. The word was so quiet, no one else heard it. His blood ran cold, turning into slush in his veins. Elena was shouting orders. "Away from the glass, everyone! Move to the basement shelter now, move!" The largest of the ships, a leviathan that blotted out the sun, halted its descent and hovered over the bay. A holographic projection, large enough to be seen from the entire coastline, flickered into existence against the gray sky. It was a face. It was wolf-like. But to call it a wolf was to insult the intelligence burning in its amber eyes. It had a muzzle, yes, and fur that was a mix of steel gray and white. But the structure was humanoid, sentient, and aristocratic. It wore armor that looked like it had been grown rather than forged. "People of Terra," the voice boomed, rattling the windows. It was speaking English. But the accent was thick, guttural, dragging the vowels over gravel. "I am General Hadric Greyfang of the Third Armada," the giant wolf declared. "You harbor a thief, a traitor to the High Pack and the Treaty of Orion. We do not seek your meager resources. We seek justice." Adrian grabbed Mira, who was standing frozen by the sound system, her face pale. He pulled her into the shelter of a structural pillar. "Deliver the traitor to us," Hadric continued. "You have one rotation of your sun. If you refuse, we will shatter your seawalls and let the ocean swallow your history. Submit or drown." The projection vanished. The sky was now filled with hundreds of smaller dropships, swarming like angry hornets. "Dad," Mira's voice was small, trembling. "What are they?" "The history books said the Fenrir never came this close to the core systems." "They aren't supposed to," Adrian said. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "They are here for me." "Or they are here for what I know." Elena grabbed Adrian's arm. Her face was pale, but her eyes were focused. "Adrian, I need you. The shelter is going to be packed. 3,000 people are going to try to cram in here in the next hour. I need to coordinate the National Guard. But I need you to keep the people inside calm. If they panic, they crush each other." "I have to get Mira out," Adrian said, his instinct to flee overwhelming him. "We have to go inland." "There is no inland," Elena snapped. "Look at the radar. They have surrounded the perimeter. The community center is the designated bunker. You are the only one they listen to." "Adrian, they don't trust the police. They trust the man who feeds them." Adrian looked at the terrified faces in the hall. Mrs. Gorski was clutching her rosary. Mr. Henderson was holding a tray of stuffing like a shield. "Dad," Mira said, gripping his hand. "We can't leave them." Adrian looked at his daughter. She had her mother's chin, that stubborn tilt that refused to back down. He closed his eyes for a second, inhaling the lingering scent of his soup star anise, ginger, roasted bone. "Okay," Adrian said. "Okay, Mira, you help get the elderly down the ramp. Elena, get the comms working. I'll keep the kitchen running. People need to eat. Panic burns calories." It was a ridiculous thing to say, but it grounded them 2 hours later. The world was a nightmare of noise and static. The center was packed to capacity. The air recycling units were straining to keep up with the humidity of 3,000 frightened bodies. Adrian was in the kitchen, cooking like a man possessed. He had emptied the pantry. Every bean, every grain of rice, every frozen chicken was going into the pots. The act of chopping, stirring, and tasting was the only thing keeping his hands from shaking. Outside, the invasion had hit a snag, high above the Eastern District. A Fenrir dropship was trailing smoke. It had taken a hit, not from human defenses, but from a mechanical failure, a blown stabilizer coupling. It spiraled down, a screaming comet of black metal, and slammed into the abandoned industrial park just 3 blocks from the community center. Inside the wreckage, Commander Skara Tern coughed, the harsh, acrid smoke of burning coolant stinging her snout. She shoved a piece of crumpled bulkhead off her legs and growled. "Report," she barked. Her voice was a rasp, layered with the growl of a predator. Kyle, a young warrior barely out of his pup years, dragged himself from the pilot's seat, His armor was scuffed, his ears flattened against his skull in submission and pain. Stabilizers failed. Commander, we are grounded. The rest of the pack is holding position over the water. Skara unclicked her harness and stood up. She was tall, nearly 7 feet. Her frame powerful and lithe under her kinetic mesh armor. Her fur was a mottled pattern of winter white and charcoal. She checked her pulse rifle. It was active. "We are isolated," Skara said. She sniffed the air. The atmosphere of Earth was thick, heavy with moisture and pollutants. It smelled of decay and whetstone. "We need to regroup with the main force. But first, we secure a perimeter." "Commander," Kale said, tilting his head. "Do you smell that?" Skara paused. She flared her nostrils, filtering out the burning metal and the ozone. Underneath the stench of the city, there was something else. A ribbon of scent winding through the broken streets. It was faint, but it was undeniable. It smelled of warmth. It smelled of marrow, rich with iron, of roots pulled from damp earth, of a spice that grew only on the southern continent of Fenris Prime during the equinox. "Impossible," Skara murmured. Her ears pricked forward. "That is hearth scent." "It smells like the old rations," Kale said, his tail twitching involuntarily. "But fresh." "It is a trap," Skara said, her eyes narrowing, but her stomach betrayed her, letting out a low rumble. They had been on synthetic nutrient paste for 6 months during the voyage. The scent was pulling at something primal in her brain, something older than her military conditioning. "We investigate, weapons tight. If it is a lure, we kill the trapper." They moved out of the wreckage, a squad of 6 wolves moving with the silent, fluid grace of apex predators. They stuck to the shadows, avoiding the panicked humans running in the streets. They followed the scent. It led them past the burning cars, past the shattered storefronts, straight to the double doors of the Whispering Ladle Community Center. Inside the kitchen, Adrian was ladling soup into paper cups. "Keep the line moving," he told a volunteer. 1 cup per person. Tell them there are plenty." "Mr. Locke," a volunteer named Sarah said, her voice trembling. "There's a noise at the loading dock." Adrian froze. The loading dock led directly into the kitchen storage. "Stay here," Adrian said. He grabbed his heavy chef's knife, a 10-inch blade of high-carbon steel. It was pathetic against plasma armor, but it was all he had. He walked toward the back of the kitchen, past the bubbling vats. He pushed open the swinging doors to the loading bay. The bay doors had been forced open. Standing there, silhouetted against the gray light of the alley, were 6 figures. They were terrifying, towering, fur-covered, armored in plates that shifted like living scales. Their legs were digitigrade, ending in clawed boots that clicked on the concrete. They held weapons that hummed with a low, menacing violet light. Adrian stopped. His breath caught in his throat. The leader, the female with the white streaked fur, stepped forward, her golden eyes locked onto him. She raised her weapon, aiming directly at his chest, behind Adrian. The kitchen door swung open. Mira ran in. "Dad, we need more bowls." She stopped. She screamed. The sound triggered the wolves. Kyle, the young one, snarled a sound like grinding gears and lunged forward, his weapon charging up with a high-pitched whine. He was reacting to the sudden movement, his training taking over. "No," Elena shouted, appearing from the hallway, fumbling for her sidearm. It was chaos, a slaughter waiting to happen. The distance was 20 feet. Kale's finger was tightening on the trigger. Adrian didn't think. He didn't plan. He dropped the knife. He stepped in front of Mira, raised his empty hands, and shouted, "Vaka gratua ni sol korathna." The words tore out of his throat, harsh and guttural, resonating with a cadence that no human vocal cord was supposed to master. "Stop! Hold your fire! We are of the hearth." The effect was instantaneous. Kale skidded to a halt. his claws gouging lines into the linoleum. He looked confused, his ears swiveling wildly. He lowered his weapon. Looking back at his commander, Skara Tern stood frozen. Her weapon was still raised, but her finger had relaxed. She looked at this small, fragile human in the gray sweater. She looked at his hands, open and empty. Then she looked at the pot bubbling on the stove behind him. The scent was overwhelming now. It was the scent of the high halls before the war. It was the scent of safety. "You speak the old tongue," Skara said. Her voice was a growl, translated by the device on her collar into a flat, mechanical English. But the shock was evident in her body language. She lowered the barrel of her rifle 1 inch. How? Adrian was trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of a secret kept for 15 years, suddenly exploding into the light. He could feel Mira staring at his back. He could feel Elena's shock radiating from the doorway. Adrian stammered in English, then switched back to the Fenrir tongue, though his accent was rusty, flavored with human softness. "I cooked. The scent is for sharing, not for blood." Skara stepped fully into the light. Her armor was scorched, and she looked exhausted, her fur matted with sweat and grime. She looked at the soup. Then she looked at Adrian with a gaze that stripped him bare. "That smell," Skara said, switching to English. "It smells like home," she signaled her squad. "Lower weapons, but do not holster." The tension in the room didn't break. It just changed shape. It went from the sharp panic of impending violence to the heavy, suffocating weight of mystery. "Dad," Mira whispered, "what did you just say to them?" Adrian didn't answer her. He kept his eyes on the wolf commander. "My name is Adrian," he said, his voice steadying. "And it's Thanksgiving. If you are hungry, there is soup. If you are here to kill us, you will have to wait until we are done eating." Skara stared at him for a long, agonizing 5 seconds. Her nostrils flared again, taking in the starriness and the roasted pork. "We are hungry," Skara admitted, the words tasting strange in her mouth. "Then sit," Adrian said, gesturing to the prep table. And as the alien warlords from the stars hesitated, caught between the directive to conquer and the biological imperative to answer the call of a familiar meal, Adrian turned back to his stove. He picked up the ladle. His hands were shaking, but the soup needed stirring. The silence in the kitchen of the whispering ladle was heavy, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic, almost reverent sound of 6 alien warlords consuming pork bone broth. Skara Tern sat on a reinforced steel prep table, her legs dangling, her clawed boots inches from the floor. She held the paper cup with a delicacy that belied her 7-foot frame. She took a sip, her golden eyes closing for a fraction of a second, before snapping open to pin Adrian lock in place. "You lie," Skara said. Her voice was low, a rumble that vibrated through the stainless steel counters. "You claimed you translated old texts, yet you speak the high dialect of the Northern Reach. That is not written in your human libraries. That is an oral tradition, spoken only by the hearthkeepers and the diplomats of the First Era." Adrian wiped his hands on his apron, turning his back to her to pretend to organize the spice rack. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "I had access to classified archives," he said, keeping his voice steady. "During the first contact protocols, I have a knack for languages." "A knack," Skara repeated, testing the word. She set the empty cup down. "This soup, it contains grove root. No, that does not grow here." "It is ginger," Adrian corrected, "and star anise, earth spices. But the chemical compound is similar to what grows in your red soil." Skara slid off the table. She towered over him, the smell of ozone and wet fur radiating from her armor. "You mimic the taste of home with alien weeds. You speak the tongue of my ancestors. And yet, you are a cook in a basement, hiding behind a wall of steam. She leaned in, her muzzle inches from his face. I do not believe in coincidences. Humans. I believe in strategy. And traps. It is not a trap. Elena Park's voice cut through the tension. She stood in the doorway, her tablet clutched to her chest like a shield. Her face was pale, but her posture was rigid with authority. It is hospitality, and right now, it is the only thing keeping the National Guard from storming this building and turning it into a crater. Skara turned her gaze to Elena. Your soldiers are loud. They smell of fear and gun oil. If they breach, we will kill them. And then the fleet above will turn this city to glass, Elena countered, stepping into the room. But you are not shooting, you are eating, which means you are stalling. Why? Skara looked at her subordinate, Kyle, who was scraping the bottom of his second cup of soup with a claw. The young warrior looked up, embarrassed, and straightened his posture. The general has given you one rotation, Skara said. I have detected anomalies, a signal resonance in this sector that matches the frequency of a lost archive. I have requested a pause to investigate. You are looking for a library, Elena asked, confused. I am looking for the source of the interference, Skara lied smoothly. Adrian saw the lie in the twitch of her left ear, a tell he remembered from a lifetime ago. If you wish to survive the next 24 hours, you will assist me, and he. She pointed a sharp claw at Adrian. Will translate. The temporary command center was established in the manager's office of the community center. It was a cramped room, filled with filing cabinets, and the smell of stale coffee. Now, crowded with holographic tactical displays, projected from Elena's equipment. Elena slammed her hand down on the desk, rattling the monitors. You were a diplomat, a xenolinguist. Adrian sat in a folding chair, looking at his hands. Technically, I was a junior attaché to the Interstellar Corps. Don't give me that, Elena hissed, keeping her voice low so Mira, who was waiting in the hallway, wouldn't hear. I pulled your file, Adrian. It is redacted. 90% of it is black ink. You weren't just an attaché. You were on the Orion platform during the first peace talks 15 years ago. Adrian looked up, his eyes tired. I was. Why didn't you tell me? Elena's voice cracked, wavering between anger and hurt. 5 years, Adrian. We have shared meals. We have weathered hurricanes. I thought I knew you. I thought you were just a guy who liked soup and hated politics. I am that guy, Adrian said softly. I became that guy because the other guy, the diplomat, lost everything. Elena stared at him, waiting. Her name was Rhea, Adrian said, the name tasting like ash and honey in his mouth. She was the third claw of the Fenrir delegation. We were supposed to draft a trade agreement. We drafted a marriage contract instead. Elena's eyes widened. Are you married to one of them? It wasn't forbidden, technically, just unprecedented. Adrian rubbed his thumb over the hidden pendant under his shirt. When the talks collapsed and the extremist factions restarted the war, she was targeted. They called her a blood traitor. She died, trying to get me to a shuttle. I took Mira, she was just a baby, and I ran. I erased my biometric data. I came here, to the edge of the world, where no one looks at the sky. Mira is... Elena trailed off, the realization hitting her. She is human enough to pass, Adrian said. She has my DNA structure primarily, but her immune system, her hearing are enhanced. If Hadric finds out she exists, he won't just kill her, he will dissect her. Elena sank into her chair, the anger draining away, replaced by a profound, terrifying clarity. That is why the fleet is here. They are not just conquering. They are hunting. Hadric demanded the traitor, Adrian said. He means me, or he means what I stole. He thinks I stole state secrets. I just saved my daughter." Elena looked at him, seeing the man she had developed feelings for in a completely new light. The quiet shyness wasn't cowardice. It was camouflage. "Okay," Elena said, straightening her jacket. She forced the professional mask back onto her face, though her eyes remained soft. "Okay. We keep Mira out of sight. We keep you front and center as a translator, not a target. We buy time. The mayor wants me to open a channel to Hadric, but Hadric is ignoring all frequencies. We have to work through Skara." "Skara is suspicious," Adrian warned. "She recognizes the cultural nuance. She smells the past on me." "Then confuse her," Elena said. "Overload her with human nonsense. Keep her talking until I can get the planetary defense grid online, or find a way to jam their targeting scanners." The negotiations took place in the main dining hall. The tables had been pushed back to create a neutral zone. On one side stood Elena and Adrian. On the other, Skara and two of her lieutenants. The rest of the wolf pack prowled the perimeter, eyeing the vending machines with deep suspicion. "We demand access to your communication grid," Skara stated, "to search for the signal." "We can grant that," Adrian translated, adding his own spin to the Fenrir phrasing to make it sound more like a cooperative offer than a surrender. "But first, we must discuss the logistics of the civilian population. It is a holiday." Skara tilted her head. "Explain this ritual, Thanksgiving. Is it preparation for the winter famine?" "No," Adrian said. "It is a feast of gratitude." "Gratitude for what survival?" "Sometimes." Adrian smiled wryly. "Mostly for family and food," Skara snorted. "And the event tomorrow, the data streams mention a Black Friday. Is this a ritual combat, a culling of the weak?" Adrian blinked. He looked at Elena. Elena bit her lip to keep from laughing hysterically. "In a manner of speaking," Adrian said in Fenrir, "it is a chaotic skirmish for resources. Warriors gather at dawn to seize discounted electronics. Casualties are not uncommon. It is a test of endurance and greed." Skara nodded approvingly. "I understand. A warrior culture masked as commerce. Perhaps you are not as soft as you look." The tension in the room eased, but only slightly. Skara walked along the line of serving tables. She stopped at a bowl of cranberry sauce. She dipped a claw in and tasted it. She grimaced. "Too sweet," she judged. "It lacks the tang of bloodberry." "I will add pomegranate molasses next time," Adrian murmured without thinking. Skara froze. She turned to him slowly. "Rhea used to say that. She preferred pomegranate to sweeten the tartness." The air left the room. Adrian stood paralyzed. "You knew her," he whispered, switching to English in his shock. "Everyone knew the traitor Rhea," Skara said, her voice hard. "She was the brightest of our generation, and she threw it away for a soft-skinned human who could not even survive a mild winter." Skara stepped closer, her golden eyes searching Adrian's face. "You speak like her. You cook like her. You even smell of the incense she burned to clear her mind." Adrian struggled. "Are you the pet she kept?" Skara asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Did you survive the purge that took her?" "I am no one's pet," Adrian said, his voice hardening with a sudden, sharp authority that made Skara's ears flick back. "I was her husband, and she did not throw her life away. She gave it to me." Skara stared at him. For a moment, the alien warrior vanished, replaced by a creature grappling with a ghost. Then she shook her head, the armor rattling. "If you were her mate," Skara said, "then you are the traitor I was sent to find. And yet—" She looked around the hall, at the frightened families huddled in blankets, eating the soup that Adrian had made. "You do not act like a thief. You act like a pack leader." She turned away, signaling her guards. "I will not report this to Hadric. Not yet. I need to be certain. Until then, The truce holds. Keep cooking, human. Your broth clears my head. While the adults navigated the minefield of diplomacy, a quieter, stranger alliance was forming near the loading dock. Mira sat on a stack of crates, her portable gaming console in her hands. She was nervously tapping out a rhythm on the buttons. 10 feet away, Kale, the young Fenrir warrior, was standing guard. He was supposed to be watching the perimeter, but his eyes kept drifting to the device in Mira's hands. "Is it a tactical simulation?" Kale asked. His English was stilted, learned from hypnotapes during the voyage. Mira jumped, then looked at him. He wasn't wearing his helmet. His face was covered in short, velvet black fur, and his eyes were a startling shade of green. Unlike Skara's gold, he looked young, for a 7-foot wolfman. "No," Mira said. "It's a rhythm game. Beat Saber Chronicles. You hit the blocks to the music." Kale stepped closer. "Music! We have music, the war chants." "War chants sound intense," Mira said. "This is more electronic pop." She turned the volume up. A fast, bubbly beat filled the space between them. Kale's ears twitched. He tilted his head, listening to the syncopation. "The pattern is simple," Kale critiqued. "Lacks polyrhythm." "Oh, you're a music critic now," Mira grinned. The fear she had felt earlier was fading, replaced by the curiosity of a teenager who had spent her life feeling different and suddenly found someone even weirder. "Okay, Wolf Boy, show me what you got." Kale looked around to ensure Skara wasn't watching. He reached to his belt and tapped his communication unit. He adjusted the frequency and played a file. It was a low, guttural chanting, accompanied by the sound of drums that sounded like bone hitting metal. It was aggressive, terrifying, and undeniably powerful. "Thrum thrum Ka, thrum thrum Ka." Mira listened. Her fingers started tapping on her console. "Okay, it's a 6/8 time signature, heavy bass, but it drags a little in the middle." She plugged her console into a small portable speaker. "Let me try something." She sampled Kale's chant, looping the drum beat. Then she layered a synthesizer track over it, something bright and high frequency. She sped up the tempo. The result was a bizarre driving track that sounded like a futuristic club anthem mixed with a Viking funeral. Kale's eyes went wide. His tail gave a traitorous, involuntary wag before he clamped it against his leg. "You have corrupted the hymn of the Red Moon," Kyle said. But he was bobbing his head. "I remixed it," Mira corrected. "Now it's a dance track. See," she showed him the screen. "You tap here, here, and here." Kale extended a claw. He was hesitant. He tapped the screen. He missed the beat. "Too slow," Mira teased. "Gotta be faster, like this." She grabbed his hand, his massive, fur-covered hand with leather pads on the palm, and guided his finger. Kyle froze at the contact. Mira's hand was tiny, warm, and fragile against his. He looked at her, his green eyes dilating. He didn't pull away. "Your skin temperature is high," Kale observed softly. "I'm human," Mira said, her voice catching slightly. She felt a strange spark, a familiarity she couldn't explain. "We run hot." "The remix," Kyle said, clearing his throat to sound like rocks tumbling. "It is acceptable." "High praise," Mira laughed. Up in the shadows of the ventilation shaft, Adrian watched them. He had come to check the perimeter. But he stopped when he saw them. He saw the way Kale leaned in, not to intimidate, but to listen. He saw the way Mira looked at the alien warrior, not as a monster, but as a curiosity. It broke his heart and terrified him simultaneously. It was exactly how he had looked at Rhea, high above the earth, on the bridge of the flagship World Eater. General Hadric Greyfang stood before a massive display of the neural network. The Fenrir were a psionic-adjacent species. They shared a low-level empathic link, a pack mind that allowed for seamless coordination in battle. It was their greatest strength. But now, The display was showing corruption. Hodrick growled deep in his chest. Sector 4, New Seattle, was glowing with a soft, pulsating blue light, contrasting with the angry red of the rest of the invasion grid. "Report," Hadrick barked. His science officer, a scarred elder with one eye, approached nervously. "General, we are detecting a psychosomatic anomaly originating from the ground unit under Commander Skara. Their aggression levels have dropped by 40% in the last 3 hours. Are they under attack? Chemical warfare?" "No, General. The telemetry suggests contentment, nostalgia. Serotonin levels are spiking. It is spreading. Sir, the interceptors flying patrol over that sector are reporting a decrease in combat readiness. They are hesitant to lock targets." Hadrick narrowed his eyes. "It is an emotional virus. The humans are broadcasting a dampening field. It seems to be centered on a specific structure." The officer pointed to the Whispering Ladle Community Center on the map. "The source is biological, organic. It feels like a memory." Hodrick slammed his fist onto the console, denting the metal. "Memory is weakness. Memory is why we lost Orion. We purge the weakness." He looked at the blue light spreading like an infection. If his soldiers stopped hating the enemy, the war was over. He could not allow Skara's weakness to infect the fleet. "Prepare the orbital lance," Hodrick ordered coldly. "Sir," the officer hesitated. "Skara and her squad are there, and the bondkeeper's signal." "The signal is a ghost," Hodrick snarled. "And Skara has been compromised. She is infected with sympathy. We will cauterize the wound. Target the city. Charge the main cannon. We fire at dawn." It was 3 in the morning. The storm outside had intensified, rain lashing against the windows like gravel. The community center was quiet, filled with the sleeping forms of refugees. In the kitchen, Adrian was not sleeping. He was conducting an experiment. He had 3 small pots simmering on the stove. He wasn't just cooking. He was remembering. He closed his eyes and thought of Rhea. He thought of the lullaby she hummed. He thought of the smell of the rain on her fur. He poured that feeling into the broth. He adjusted the seasoning, more savory, less sweet, a hint of bitterness, like grief. "Try this," Adrian said softly. Skara was sitting on a crate near the back door, keeping watch. She looked up as Adrian approached with a small bowl. She took it. She sniffed it, her eyes widened. "This is—" She took a sip. A tear, a single. Heavy drop rolled down her cheek, matting her white fur. "This tastes like the morning of the first hunt," Skara whispered. "I was 6 cycles old. My father took me to the ridge. The wind smelled of ironwood. I had forgotten his face." She looked at Adrian with fear. "What are you doing? Human, this is sorcery." "It's just soup," Adrian said, his voice hoarse. "But I think I remember how your people taste the world. You don't just taste flavor. You taste intent." "You are dangerous," Skara said, trembling. She handed the bowl back, though her hands were reluctant to let it go. "Hadrick is right. You are a weapon. If you can make a warrior weep with a spoon of broth, you can dismantle an empire." "I don't want to dismantle anything," Adrian said. "I just want to feed people." "Then you are a fool," Skara said. "Because Hadrick will not eat. He will burn." She turned away, retreating into the shadows of the hallway, leaving Adrian alone with his pots and his ghosts. Elena found him 10 minutes later. She walked into the kitchen, looking frayed. "The jamming is getting worse," she said. "I can't reach the fleet. And Skara says her comms are locked out. We are blind." Adrian leaned against the counter, exhaustion settling into his bones. "They are going to attack. Hadrick knows." "Know what? That we are winning the hearts and minds," Adrian said dryly. "Or at least, the stomachs." Elena walked over to him. She stopped 2 feet away. Adrian, you need to tell me the rest. About the diplomatic days, about the bondkeeper. Skara mentioned a bondkeeper earlier when talking to Kale. I heard it on the monitor. Adrian flinched. It is a myth. Stop lying to me. Elena stepped closer, invading his personal space. We are staring down an orbital bombardment. No more secrets. Why are you so terrified of who you were? Because who I was got Rhea killed, Adrian shouted, the outburst startling them both. I was arrogant. I thought I could bridge two species with words and treaties. I didn't understand the depth of the hate. I don't want to be the hero. Elena. Heroes leave orphans. Elena looked at him, her expression softening. She reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cool against his scarred skin. You are not a hero because you signed a treaty. Adrian, she said softly. You are a hero because you stayed. Because you raised a daughter alone in a world that would hate her if they knew. Because you made soup for 3,000 people, while an alien armada aimed guns at your head. Adrian looked at her. In the dim light of the kitchen, she was beautiful, not the polished, severe beauty of the emergency manager, but the raw, honest beauty of a woman who saw him completely. Elena, he breathed. I don't need a diplomat, she whispered, stepping closer. I just need the cook. The distance between them evaporated. Adrian leaned in, drawn by a gravity he had resisted for 5 years. He could smell her perfume, rainwater, and vanilla. He tilted his head. Elena's eyes fluttered closed. Their lips were an inch apart when the world screamed. The siren cut through the air, louder than before. A red strobe light began to flash in the hallway. Whoop, 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 Elena pulled back, gasping. She looked at her wristcom. The screen was flashing red. Kinetic impact detected, Elena said, her voice turning instantly professional, though her hands were shaking. Upper atmosphere breach. They aren't waiting for the deadline. Hadric, Adrian said. The name a curse. He's firing, Elena said, looking at Adrian with wide eyes. He's trying to wipe us out. Adrian grabbed his ladle, gripping it like a sword. Then we need to serve the main course, now. He didn't know if soup could stop a laser, but he knew one thing: he was done hiding in the kitchen. If the wolves wanted a fight, he would give them a feast they would never forget. Get Mira, Adrian said. Get Skara. We are going to the roof. The roof, Elena shouted over the siren. Are you crazy? That's where the bombs will hit. That's where the ventilation intake is, Adrian said, his eyes burning with a desperate, reckless idea. If I can't get them to eat the soup, I'm going to make them breathe it. The storm had ceased to be weather. It had become a hammer. Outside the reinforced walls of the Whispering Ladle Community Center. The Pacific Ocean was no longer a body of water, but a living, dark entity throwing itself against the new Seattle seawall. The wind howled with a velocity that stripped shingles from roofs and turned street signs into shrapnel. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but the sky was a bruised, absolute black, illuminated only by the jagged veins of lightning and the ominous, pulsing red glow of the Fenrir Armada hovering in low orbit. General Hadric's voice returned, bypassing the local communication grids and vibrating directly through the structural metal of every building in the city. The rotation is complete, the general's voice boomed, sounding like boulders grinding together deep underground. You have chosen silence. Now you will accept the roar. Inside the command center, the screens flickered and died as the electromagnetic interference from the fleet's weapon charging sequence spiked. Elena Park stood in the dark, illuminated only by the emergency strobe lights. She gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles turned white. They are targeting the seawall, Elena said, her voice terrifyingly calm. If they breach the wall during a storm surge like this, the kinetic force alone We'll level the lower districts. The water will finish the rest. We are talking about 50,000 casualties in the first 10 minutes. Adrian stood by the door, wiping his hands on a towel that was already stained with turmeric and paprika. He looked exhausted, his eyes hollowed out. But there was a strange, vibrating energy around him, a static charge that made the hair on his arms stand up. "He is not just targeting the wall," Skara Tern said. The Fenrir commander was standing by the window, staring up at the burning red underbelly of the flagship World Eater. She held a datapad in her clawed hand, the screen displaying a scrolling script of jagged alien text. "I just received a narrow band transmission," Skara said. Her voice was devoid of emotion, hollowed out by a sudden, devastating realization. "It was from my sub-commander on the flagship. A warning." "A warning to evacuate?" Elena asked. Hope flaring briefly, Skara turned slowly. Her golden eyes were dim. "No. A warning to die with honor. Heydrich has designated New Seattle as a biohazard zone. He believes the emotional contamination, the hesitation my soldiers felt, is a plague. He is not launching a surgical strike. He is launching a glass protocol. He intends to incinerate the city, the refugees, and my entire squad. He is burning the infection." The silence that followed was heavier than the storm. "He's killing his own people," Mira whispered from the corner, where she was holding Kale's hand. The young wolf warrior looked sick, his ears flattened against his skull in a posture of utter grief. "To Heydrich, we are no longer people," Skara said, crushing the datapad in her hand until the glass shattered. "We have compromised hardware." Adrian stepped forward. The fear that had plagued him for 15 years, the fear of being found, of being the reason for destruction, suddenly evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. "He wants to burn the infection," Adrian said quietly. "Then let's give him a fever he cannot survive." Elena looked at him. "Adrian, we have maybe 30 minutes before the capacitors reach full charge. We can't fight a fleet." "We don't fight," Adrian said. "We feed." He turned to Skara. "Your armor. It connects to the pack mind, doesn't it? The neural link that lets you coordinate in battle." "Yes," Skara said cautiously. "But Heydrich monitors the flow. If we broadcast dissent, he will cut us off." "We aren't going to broadcast dissent," Adrian said. "We are going to broadcast dinner." He grabbed Elena's shoulders. "The ventilation system you mentioned, the intake fans for the HVAC are on the roof, but the outflow pumps into the atmospheric recyclers for the shelter." "Right? Yes," Elena said, struggling to follow. "But the shelter is sealed." "Open the vents," Adrian ordered. It was the first time Elena had ever heard him give an order like a soldier. "Open every vent in the building. Turn the fans to maximum reverse. I need the smell of this kitchen to not just fill the shelter, but to bleed out into the streets. I need it to be thick enough to taste in the air." And then, Adrian looked at Skara. "You and your squad are going to eat, and you are going to let yourselves feel everything." The kitchen became a war room, but the weapons were organic. Adrian abandoned the small pots. He fired up the industrial cauldrons, massive, 60-gallon steel vats usually reserved for emergency water boiling. He moved with a speed that defied his age, chopping, crushing, and searing. "Mira! The turkey stock!" Adrian shouted. "All of it. I don't care if it's frozen. Dump it in, Kale. Crush the garlic." Adrian pointed to a bag of bulbs. "Use the flat of your blade. Don't mince it. Smash it. I want the oils to release instantly." The young wolf warrior hesitated, then drew his combat knife, a weapon designed to pierce tank armor, and began smashing garlic cloves with a terrifying rhythm on the wooden block. Thump, thump, thump. Adrian grabbed a jar from his private reserve. It was filled with a dried, purple root, grove root. He had grown it in his hydroponic garden for a decade, never using it, saving it for a meal he thought he would never cook again. He threw it into the mortar. He ground it down, the dust rising to mix with the steam of the turkey stock, the sage, the thyme, and the roasted onions. As the scent hit the air, something happened to Adrian. It started as a hum in the base of his skull, a low-frequency vibration, like a cello string plucked in a canyon. Then came the voices. At first, they were whispers. Hunger, cold, fear, anger. They were not human voices. They were sharp, guttural, layered with the growl of a predator species. He was hearing the thoughts of Skara's squad standing guard outside. He was hearing the panic of the wolves in the crashed ship 3 blocks away, and fainter, like a radio signal drifting in from space. He heard the fleet. Target locked. Glory to the Fang. Why do my hands shake? The earth is blue. It looks like home before the burning. Dad, Mira's voice sounded far away. Dad, your nose is bleeding. Adrian touched his face. His fingers came away red. The psionic pressure was building. He was the bond keeper. A biological bridge designed to hold the memories of 2 species. And he was opening the floodgates. I'm fine, Adrian lied, his voice thick. He grabbed a handful of salt. It needs more anchors. He closed his eyes. He didn't just season the soup with salt. He seasoned it with memory. He thought of the first time he saw Rhea, standing in the diplomatic airlock, looking terrified and regal. He pulled that memory, the awe, the curiosity, and pushed it into the broth. He thought of the night Mira was born, the way Rhea had held the tiny, furless infant and wept because she knew the world would never accept her. He pushed the fierce, protective love into the bubbling vat. He thought of Elena, standing in the rain, offering him a lifeline when he was drowning in grief. He added the gratitude, the longing for a second chance. The kitchen began to warp. The air shimmered. The steam rising from the pots wasn't just white. It carried iridescent streaks of blue and gold. It's ready, Adrian gasped, clutching the edge of the stove to keep from collapsing. The voices in his head were a roar now, a cacophony of 1,000 souls demanding to be heard. Open the doors, Adrian commanded. Let them in, everyone. The main hall of the Whispering Ladle was a tableau of chaos. 3,000 refugees were huddled in blankets, children crying, the elderly praying. The air was stale and hot. Then, the kitchen doors swung open. The smell hit them first. It wasn't just the smell of food. It was a physical wave of comfort. It smelled like a wood fire on a winter night. It smelled like a mother's apron. It smelled like safety for the humans. It brought an immediate, hush-inducing calm. The crying babies stopped. The prayers trailed off. For the Fenrir, it was a sledgehammer. Skara stood near the entrance, her rifle held across her chest. When the scent hit her, she dropped the weapon. It clattered loudly on the floor. But she didn't seem to notice. Her nostrils flared, her pupils dilating until her eyes were entirely black. The Great Hall, she whispered, her voice trembling. The feast of the winter solstice, before the sky turned dark. Eat, Adrian shouted, his voice amplified by the PA system Elena had rigged. Don't just smell it, drink it. Volunteers, led by Mira and Kale, began running trays of paper cups out into the crowd. Kale moved with a desperate speed, handing cups to his fellow soldiers, to humans, to anyone with a hand to take it. Skara took a cup. Her hands were shaking so hard the liquid sloshed over the rim, burning her fur. But she didn't flinch. She raised it to her lips and drank. The moment the liquid touched her tongue, the neural network exploded. Orbital platform, the World Eater, high above the storm, in the cold vacuum of space. Pilot 7 Delta sat in the cockpit of his bomber. His finger was hovering over the firing trigger. The targeting reticle was locked on the thermal signature of the new Seattle seawall. Target lock confirmed, 7 Delta said, his voice flat. awaiting final authorization. Suddenly, a taste filled his mouth. It was impossible. He was in a sealed environment suit. He was breathing recycled oxygen. But his mouth was flooded with the taste of roasted bone marrow and grave root. And then, the vision took him. He wasn't in the cockpit. He was a pup, tumbling in the red grass of the southern plains. His brother was chasing him, laughing. His mother was calling them in for the evening meal. There was no war. There was no metal sky. There was only the golden sun and the smell of the hearth. 7 Delta gasped, his chest heaving. Tears, hot and confusing, welled up in his eyes, blurring the targeting screen. "Pilot 7 Delta, report," the comm shouted. "Why is your targeting laser drifted?" "I," 7 Delta stammered. "I can smell the rain." He wasn't alone. Across the bridge, officers were stumbling. The weapons systems officer dropped his data pad, clutching his head. "The network!" the comm officer screamed. "It is surging massive data upload from the surface. It's not a virus, its ancestors helped us. It's a memory." The community center. Adrian fell to his knees. The connection was open. He was no longer just a cook. He was the server, the router for 1,000,000 gigabytes of emotional data. He saw what they saw. He felt the collective grief of the Fenrir species, a race that had been hardened by 200 years of constant war, stripped of their culture, their art, their softness, until they were nothing but biological weapons. And the soup, this simple, hot mixture of earth and Fenris, was reminding them of what they had cut away. Hodrick was fighting it. "On the bridge of the flagship," the general roared, a sound of pure, terrified rage. He clawed at his own head, ripping the neural interface cables from his scalp. "Get out of my head!" Hadrick screamed. "It is a lie! It is poison!" But the bondkeeper did not let go. Adrian, his nose bleeding profusely now, his vision tunneling, reached out through the psychic void and grabbed Hadrick's mind. "Look," Adrian projected. "Look at what you destroyed." He forced Hodrick to see Rhea. Not the traitor, but the woman. He showed Hadrick the moment Rhea died. The way she had looked at the burning city and whispered, "They are just afraid." "Adrian, forgive them." Hadrick staggered back, crashing into the command console. The vision was too clear, too visceral. He could taste the blood in her mouth. He could feel her sorrow not for herself, but for her people who had forgotten how to love. "Fire!" Hadrick bellowed, slamming his fist onto the manual override. "Fire the main cannon, silence them." "Cannon!" Silence the ghosts. The command went through, the automated systems, bypassed by the manual override, initiated the firing sequence. A beam of concentrated plasma, thick as a skyscraper, erupted from the belly of the World Eater, down on the ground. The sky turned white. "Incoming!" Elena screamed, tackling Adrian to the floor. But the shot didn't hit the city. At the last microsecond, the helm officer, a veteran wolf named Vora, who was weeping silently as the taste of her grandmother's bread filled her mouth, yanked the flight stick to the hard left. The beam sliced through the atmosphere, missing the New Seattle seawall by less than a mile. It slammed into the ocean, 20 miles offshore. The impact was cataclysmic. The water vaporized instantly, creating a steam explosion that rose into the stratosphere. The shock wave hit the ocean floor, displacing millions of tons of water. "They missed," Mira whispered, looking up from under a table. "No," Skara said, standing up. Her eyes were clear now, burning with a fierce, terrifying resolve. She wiped the broth from her mouth. "They didn't miss. They refused." But the danger wasn't over. The displacement from the blast had created a rogue wave, a wall of water 200 feet high, moving at the speed of a jet airliner, heading straight for the already weakened seawall. "The wave!" Elena gasped, scrambling to the window. "The impact created a tsunami. It's going to breach the wall." The soup had stopped the laser, But physics was still physics. The water was coming. Adrian struggled to his feet. He felt light, hollowed out, as if his soul had been scraped clean. But he was still the chef. And the service wasn't over. "Skara," Adrian croaked. "Your ships, the drop ships, can they generate a kinetic barrier?" "Yes," Skara said. "But we need the fleet. My single squad cannot stop the ocean." "Then tell them," Adrian said. "Don't order them. Invite them." Skara looked at him. She touched the comms unit on her collar. She didn't use military encryption. She opened the general channel, the one that broadcast to every single Fenrir unit in the system. "This is Commander Skara Tern," she said, her voice amplified by the PA system, echoing through the hall and, via the open line, to the stars. "You have tasted the truth," Skara said. "You remember who we were before the armor. We were protectors. We were the shield of the pack." She looked out the window at the terrifying wall of black water rushing toward the city that sheltered them. "There are pups here," Skara said softly. "There are elders. There is a pack. And they have fed us." She paused, letting the silence hang for a heartbeat. "The soup is good," Skara said, her voice cracking with emotion. "But the debt must be paid. Descend and hold. Defend the pack." For a second, nothing happened. Then, the sky began to fall, not with bombs, but with ships, hundreds of them, drop ships, interceptors, heavy frigates. They broke formation from the flagship. They ignored Hadrick's screaming orders. They dove through the storm clouds, their engines roaring like dragons. They didn't fire. They formed a line, a wall of steel and energy shields, interlocking wingtip to wingtip, hovering just above the churning surface of the ocean, directly in the path of the oncoming wave. "They're building a dam," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face. "They are building a dam out of spaceships." The wave hit. It slammed into the kinetic shields of the Fenrir fleet with the force of a nuclear bomb. The ships groaned, metal buckling, engines screaming as they fought the hydraulic pressure. In the kitchen, Adrian felt the impact in his mind. He felt the strain of 1,000 pilots gritting their teeth, holding the line. He felt their resolve, hold. The collective voice of Fenrir whispered in his head. "Hold for the soup. Hold for the memory. Hold for the home we found." The water rose, crested, and smashed against the shields. Fireballs erupted as engines overloaded. Some ships were crushed, spiraling into the dark water. But the line held. The energy dispersion broke the wave's momentum, shattering the wall of water into a chaotic, but manageable surge that washed harmlessly against the new Seattle seawall. The city shook, but it stood. Inside the community center, there was no cheering, just a stunned, holy silence. Then, a single sound broke it. A Fenrir warrior, one of Skara's guards, threw his head back and let out a howl. It wasn't a war cry. It was a song, a long, mournful, beautiful note of victory and sorrow. Another wolf joined in, then another. Then the humans started clapping. It started with Mira, then spread to Mrs. Gorski, then to the entire hall. Adrian slumped against the stove, sliding down until he hit the floor. He was trembling uncontrollably. Elena was there in an instant, kneeling beside him. Adrian, look at me." "Did they eat?" Adrian mumbled, his eyes unfocused. "Was it enough salt?" "It was perfect, Adrian," Elena sobbed, pulling his head onto her lap. "It was the best damn soup in the universe," high above, on the bridge of the empty flagship. General Hadrick sat alone. The bridge was silent. His crew had abandoned their posts or were locked in the trance of memory. He looked at the tactical display. The fleet was gone. They were down there protecting the enemy. He had lost, not to a superior tactic, not to a bigger gun. He had lost to a bowl of broth and a man in a stained apron. Hodrick stood up. He walked to the viewing port. He looked down at the blue marble of Earth. The traitor, Hadrick whispered, but there was no venom in the word anymore, only a profound, crushing exhaustion. He didn't steal our secrets, he stole our hearts. He turned back to the comms panel. He had one loyal unit left, his personal honor guard. "Prepare my shuttle," Hadrick said quietly. "We go to the surface." "To negotiate, General," the automated voice of the computer asked. Hadrick touched the hilt of his ceremonial blade. "No, to finish the duel. If he wants to be the Alpha, he must face the Alpha." Down in the kitchen, Adrian's eyes fluttered closed. The connection was fading, but the warmth remained. He felt Elena's hand on his cheek. He felt Mira hugging his legs. And for the first time in 15 years, the ghosts of the past weren't screaming. They were full. The sky above the Pacific Northwest was a chaotic mosaic of fire and rain. The storm, unnatural in its ferocity, swirled with the debris of a battle that was no longer about conquest, but about the soul of a species. Up in the exosphere, the Fenrir Armada was tearing itself apart. The neural network, flooded with the sudden, overwhelming empathy transmitted by Adrian's soup, had fractured the rigid military hierarchy. Ships that had tasted the memory of home were now turning their shields toward Earth, while loyalist frigates, their commanders frantically trying to purge the emotional virus from their systems, opened fire on their own brethren. Streaks of plasma illuminated the heavy, bruised clouds like erratic lightning. Debris from shattered hulls rained down into the ocean, hissing as it hit the churning black water. Down in New Seattle, the rogue wave broken, but not defeated by the sacrificial line of Fenrir ships, slammed into the seawall. The sound was not a crash. It was a physical blow to the chest of the city. The concrete groaned, a deep, tectonic complaint that vibrated through the souls of every boot in the Whispering Ladle Community Center. Water crested the top of the barrier, 50 feet of freezing, debris-choked foam crashing down into the lower industrial districts. "Structure integrity at 60%, Elena shouted, her voice cutting through the panic in the main hall. She was no longer just a manager. She was a general of logistics. "The basement levels are flooding. Move the triage unit to the second floor now." In the kitchen, the heart of the resistance had stopped beating. Adrian Locke lay on the linoleum floor, his face the color of old parchment. He was not injured in the physical sense. No shrapnel had touched him, but he looked as though he had been hollowed out. The effort of acting as a psionic conduit, of pushing the raw, unfiltered essence of humanity and memory through the bondkeeper connection, had burned through his reserves. "Adrian!" Elena slid across the floor, ignoring the water that was beginning to seep under the back door. She knelt beside him, her hands frantically checking his pulse. It was thready, fluttering like a moth trapped in a jar. "He is in shock," Skara said, appearing beside her. The wolf commander looked battered. Her armor was scorched from the heat of the kitchen and the strain of the psychic backlash. She knelt, her massive form dwarfing Elena, and placed a clawed hand gently on Adrian's forehead. His mind is quiet. Too quiet. He poured everything out. "We need a doctor," Elena snapped, her eyes fierce with tears she refused to shed. "Get Dr. Eris from the refugee group. Tell him it is critical." Skara nodded to Kale, who sprinted away. The commander looked down at the human man who had just disarmed a fleet with a ladle. "He saved us," Skara whispered. "He made us remember who we were before the armor." "He's an idiot," Elena choked out, smoothing the hair back from Adrian's damp forehead. "A brave, stubborn, reckless idiot." Outside, the city was screaming. The floodwaters were rising in the streets, carrying cars and dumpsters like toys. The civil war in the sky was causing collateral damage. Stray energy bolts were impacting the bay, sending geysers of steam hundreds of feet into the air. But amidst the destruction, Something miraculous was happening. Down in the flooded streets of Sector 4, a transport truck carrying evacuees had tipped over, trapped against a crumbling storefront by the rising current. The water was rising past the windows. "Help! Someone help!" a woman screamed from inside the cab. A shadow fell over the truck. It wasn't a rescue helicopter. It was a Fenrir dropship, hovering low, its engines roaring against the wind. A cable lowered. But it wasn't a human rescue swimmer who descended. It was a squad of Fenrir warriors, their armor sealed against the elements. Kyle was among them. Having returned from fetching the doctor, he dropped into the chest-deep water, the current smashing against his heavy frame. He didn't stumble. He waded toward the truck, his boots locking onto the asphalt with magnetic grips. "Hold on," Kyle roared, his voice amplified by his helmet. "We have you on the other side of the truck." Mira was waist-deep in the water, wearing a bright yellow life vest and holding a safety line. She had slipped out of the center against orders, unable to sit still while her city drowned. "Kyle!" Mira shouted over the wind. "The door is jammed. The pressure is too high." Kyle looked at her. For a moment, the alien warrior and the teenage girl locked eyes across the hood of the sinking truck. "Together," Kale said. He jammed his claws into the gap of the doorframe. Metal shrieked. "Pull the latch when I leverage." "On 3, Mira yelled. 1, 2, 3, Kale roared, his muscles bunching under the kinetic mesh. He didn't just open the door. He ripped it off its hinges. Mira lunged forward, grabbing the driver, an elderly man clutching a cat carrier, and pulling him onto the roof of the truck where the rescue basket waited. A drone, piloted by a news crew operating from a bunker miles away, captured the image. It was grainy and shaken by the wind. But the picture was unmistakable. A 7-foot wolf alien and a human girl, passing a terrified grandfather between them, while the alien shielded them both from a piece of falling masonry with his own body. The image hit the global network instantly, in bunkers across the world. People watching the invasion unfold saw not monsters, but saviors. They saw the enemy reaching out a hand, back in the community center. The immediate crisis of the flood was stabilizing. The Fenrir soldiers under Skara's command were using their directed energy weapons not to kill, but to weld steel plates over the breached windows, sealing the building against the storm. Adrian gasped, his eyes flying open. He didn't wake up gently. He woke up with a start, his body jerking as if he were falling. "Rhea!" he shouted, the name tearing from his throat. "I'm here," Elena said softly, squeezing his hand. "I'm here, Adrian. Rhea is gone. You are in the kitchen." Adrian blinked, his vision swimming. He focused on Elena's face. She looked exhausted, her makeup smeared, her uniform wet, but her eyes were steady anchors in the chaos. "The fleet," Adrian rasped. His throat felt like he had swallowed glass. "Fighting itself," Skara said, stepping into his field of vision. "But the barrage has stopped. You broke the chain of command. Spirit Cook." Adrian tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness slammed him back down. "Hodrick." "Silent," Skara said, grimly. "Which is worse? He is a predator who hunts in silence." Dr. Eris, a harried-looking man with thick glasses, finished checking Adrian's vitals. "He is suffering from extreme neural exhaustion. It is like he ran a marathon while solving quantum physics equations. He needs rest, days of it." "I don't have days," Adrian muttered, forcing himself to sit up despite the doctor's protest. "Hodrick isn't done. I know him. Or I know his memories. I saw them." Elena helped him prop himself up against the stainless steel island. "What did you see, Adrian?" "I saw why he fights," Adrian said, his voice hauntingly quiet. "He isn't evil, he's broken. He thinks memory is pain. He thinks if he erases the past, he stops hurting. He wants to turn the universe into a blank slate because he can't bear to read the history book anymore. He is a coward, Skara spat. He kills to silence his own ghosts. No, Adrian said. He's a grieving father. He lost his entire brood in the Orion conflict. He sent them to the front lines himself, Skara froze. That is not in the official records. I saw it. Adrian tapped his temple. When the soup connected us, I felt his grief. It was colder than space. Before Skara could respond, the building shook again, this time. It wasn't the waves. It was the sonic boom of an atmospheric entry. Proximity alert, a Fenrir guard shouted from the doorway. Class A dropship. The signature matches the high command. It is landing in the plaza. He's here, Elena whispered, through the reinforced windows. They saw it. A sleek, black shuttle, shaped like a dagger, descended through the rain. It crushed a parked car as it touched down in the flooded street, outside the center. The engines whined down, and the ramp hissed open. General Hadric Greyfang emerged. He was alone, no guards, no army, just the Alpha, wearing his ceremonial armor, his cape heavy with water. He held a massive energy glaive in one hand, but it was deactivated. He walked toward the community center, the floodwaters swirling around his knees. He stopped 10 yards from the main doors and looked up at the security camera. His voice boomed from the external speakers, bypassing the damaged comms. I know you're listening. Traitor, Hadric said. His voice was not the roar of a monster, but the cold, steel tone of an executioner. You have poisoned my fleet with hallucinations. You have turned warriors into weeping children with your chemical warfare. He pointed the glaive at the door. Come out, face me. If you are the bondkeeper, prove your strength. If you hide, I will detonate the antimatter core of my shuttle and vaporize this entire city block. Inside, panic flared again among the refugees. He's bluffing, Elena said, though her face was pale. He is not, Skara said. The Alpha does not bluff. He intends to cleanse the stain of his failure with fire. Adrian pushed himself to his feet. He swayed, gripping the counter. No, Elena said, stepping in front of him. You can barely stand. You are not going out there. He wants me. Elena, if I go, he leaves the rest of you alone. If you go, he cuts your head off on live television, Elena shouted. She grabbed his face with both hands, forcing him to look at her. I almost lost you to the soup. Adrian, I am not losing you to a wolf with a god complex. You are staying here. She turned to Skara. Open the doors. I'm going out. Elena. Adrian lunged for her, but Skara held him back with one arm gently, but with the strength of a hydraulic press. She is the chieftain of this tribe, Skara said to Adrian. Let her speak. Elena marched to the doors. She checked her sidearm, smoothed her wet uniform, and nodded to the guards. Open it. The doors slid open. The wind and rain blasted in. Elena walked out onto the steps of the community center. She stood 5 feet 4 inches tall against the 9-foot bulk of the alien general. She looked like a candle standing before a hurricane. Go back to your ship. General, Elena shouted, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. This facility is under the protection of the sovereign city of New Seattle. You are trespassing. Hadric looked down at her with something resembling amusement. The administrator, the one who organizes the logistics of retreat. Where is the male? Where is the one who stirs the pot? He is resting, Elena said coldly. Because saving your fleet from its own stupidity was exhausting work. Hadric snarled, a low rumble of thunder. He used biological agents to induce delirium. He is a war criminal. He used soup, Elena yelled back, stepping forward into the rain. He used compassion, and if that feels like poison to you, General, then you are more sick than I thought. Hadric stepped closer. the energy blade humming to life. The violet light illuminated Elena's defiant face. "Move aside, human female, or I will cut you down." "If you want him," Elena said, not flinching. "You have to go through me, and if you kill me, you prove everything the soup showed them. You prove you are just a butcher, not a leader." Hadric raised the blade. "So be it." "Wait!" The voice came from the shadows of the doorway. But it wasn't Adrian, it was Skara. The commander walked out, her own weapon holstered. She stood beside Elena, forming a wall. "You strike her," Skara said in the high tongue. "And you strike the honor of the pack," Hadric sneered. Skara turned. "The disappointment. You side with the meat." "I side with the truth," Skara said. "You claim the humans were soulless vermin. You claim they had no memory, no honor. You lied." "I did what was necessary to preserve the Empire." "You did what was necessary to preserve your pain," Skara roared. She reached into her belt. She didn't pull a grenade. She pulled a thermos. It was a battered, steel thermos she had taken from the kitchen. "You call it poison," Skara challenged. "You call it a trick, then prove it." She threw the thermos. It clattered on the wet pavement at Hadric's feet. "This is the challenge of the hearth," Skara declared. "The oldest law of Fenris. If a leader believes a meal is tainted, he must taste it before he condemns the cook. Drink it. Hadric, if it is poison, you die and become a martyr. If it is a trick, your superior mind will see through it." "But if it is truth," Skara leaned forward, "if it is truth, then you will face what you have been running from for 20 cycles. Hadric stared at the thermos. The rain drummed against his armor. The entire fleet, those ships that could still receive a signal, was watching. The refugees inside were watching. Adrian, supported by Dr. Eris in the doorway, was watching. Hadric deactivated his blade. He bent down and picked up the thermos. "I fear no truth," Hadric growled. "I will drink this swill, and then I will execute the traitor." He unscrewed the cap. Steam rose into the cold air. But this wasn't the same soup Adrian had served the others. Adrian had been awake for 10 minutes before Elena went out. He had added something to the pot Skara took. He hadn't added comfort. He hadn't added the sweetness of home. He had added the bitter root of Morum, and he had poured in his own knowledge of Hadric's loss. Hadric raised the thermos to his lips and drank a massive gulp. The effect was not a warm wave of nostalgia. It was a punch to the gut. Hadric staggered. He dropped the thermos. He clawed at his chest, gasping. "What is this?" he wheezed. He didn't see a meadow. He didn't see his mother. He saw fire. He saw the Orion sector burning. He saw the faces of his sons, the ones he had ordered to hold the line against a supernova. He saw them burning. And he felt for the first time in 20 years the excruciating, jagged agony of his own heart breaking. The soup forced him to feel the grief he had surgically removed from his psyche. It forced him to acknowledge that he had killed them, not the enemy. He had sacrificed them to his pride. "No," Hadric screamed. It was a sound of pure devastation. He fell to his knees in the water. "My boys, my pups, I am so sorry," the mighty general, the scourge of the Outer Rim, curled into a ball in the middle of the street, weeping with the raw, ugly sobs of a parent who has outlived their children. The silence that followed was absolute. The Fenrir warriors who had landed with him lowered their weapons. They looked at their broken alpha, then at Skara. Skara stepped forward. She didn't gloat. She looked at Hadric with pity. "The war is over, General," she said softly. "The ghosts have spoken." She turned to the sky and raised her fist. "Cease fire," Skara ordered. "The Alpha has fallen. We are no longer the sword. We are the shield." One by one, the red lights on the ships in orbit turned to green. The guns powered down. Hadric remained on the ground, lost in his penance. Two of his guards gently lifted him up. He didn't resist. He looked old, frail, his eyes vacant of rage, filled only with sorrow. "Take him to the medic bay," Skara ordered. "Skara, do not restrain him. He is no longer a threat. He is just a mourner." As they carried Hadric away, Elena let out a breath she felt she had been holding for a lifetime. Her legs gave way. Skara caught her. "Steady, chieftain," Skara rumbled. "It is undignified to faint after winning a duel." Elena laughed. A wet, hysterical sound. "I didn't win. The soup won." She looked back at the doorway. Adrian was standing there. He looked terrible pale, shaking, looking like death warmed over. But he was smiling. The sun did not come out immediately. The storm raged for another 3 hours before breaking, leaving behind a city battered but breathing. By midnight, the clouds had scattered, revealing a sky that was no longer empty. It was filled with stars. And among the stars hung the silhouette of the Fenrir fleet. But the red searchlights were gone, replaced by soft, white navigation beacons. They hovered in a protective formation, a steel umbrella over the wounded city, on the roof of the community center. The air was cold and crisp. The floodwaters were receding, leaving a layer of silt and debris. But the pumps were working again. Adrian sat on the edge of the HVAC unit, wrapped in a thermal blanket. He held a mug of tea, just tea, no psychic infusion. Elena stood next to him, leaning against the railing. She had changed into dry clothes, one of Adrian's oversized hoodies that smelled of thyme and laundry detergent. "The council is calling it the Thanksgiving miracle," Elena said, looking up at the ships. "Original, right. Better than the soup apocalypse," Adrian murmured into his tea. "Skara is negotiating a ceasefire," Elena continued. "She says the fleet will help rebuild the seawall. They have construction drones that can fix the breach in 2 days. In exchange, we give them We give them recipes and cultural exchange data." "Recipes?" Adrian chuckled softly. "I'm going to have to write down the exact measurements." "That's going to be annoying." Elena turned to look at him. The moonlight softened the deep lines of exhaustion on his face. "You did it, Adrian. You didn't just hide. You stood up." "I had help," Adrian said. "I had a scary government official yelling at a giant wolf for me." Elena smiled, but her eyes were serious. "You know nothing goes back to normal after this. Right, the world knows about the Fenrir. They know about you, the bondkeeper." "I know," Adrian sighed. He looked at his hand, flexing the fingers that still tingled with phantom energy. "I can't be just a cook anymore. Mira, she's going to be part of this world now. I can't hide her." "You don't have to hide her," Elena said, "and you don't have to do it alone." She stepped closer to him. The space between them, usually filled with banter or professional distance, was now filled with a quiet, heavy gravity. "I was terrified," Elena admitted, her voice dropping to a whisper. "When you went into that trance, when you collapsed, I thought I lost you before I ever actually told you." "Told me what?" Adrian asked, though he knew. The soup worked both ways. He had felt her fear in the mix. "That I hate cooking for one," Elena said, trying to keep it light, but failing. "And that I love the chef." Adrian set the mug down. He stood up, the blanket falling from his shoulders. He felt weak, battered, and older than his years. But as he looked at Elena, he felt a different kind of hunger, a hunger for a future he hadn't let himself imagine since Rhea died. He reached out and took her hand. It was warm. It was real. "I come with a lot of baggage, Elena," Adrian said. "Alien warlords, psychic trauma, a teenage daughter who remixes war chants." "I can handle baggage," Elena said, stepping into his space. "I'm in logistics. Adrian smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached his eyes. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a movie kiss. It was tentative at first, tasting of tea and exhaustion. But then Elena's hands came up to cup his face, and Adrian's arms went around her waist, pulling her close, as if to anchor himself to the earth. It deepened, becoming an affirmation of life in the face of near annihilation. Above them, a Fenrir patrol ship banked silently through the night, its white lights blinking in a slow, rhythmic salute. "Happy Thanksgiving, Adrian," Elena whispered against his lips. "Happy Thanksgiving," Adrian replied. Far below, in the kitchen, the pots were cooling, but the pilot light on the stove was still burning, a small blue flame waiting for the next meal. The world had changed. But the rule of the hearth remained: everyone eats. No one eats alone. The winter rain in New Seattle had changed. It no longer tasted of industrial runoff and ozone. It tasted clean, filtered by the massive atmospheric scrubbers that the Fenrir engineers had installed atop the repaired seawall. It had been 6 weeks since the invasion that wasn't. Or the Thanksgiving incident, as the press had politely labeled it. The Whispering Ladle Community Center was no longer just a soup kitchen. It was the center of the universe, or at least, it felt that way to Adrian Locke. He stood at his station, chopping celery with a rhythmic, meditative precision. Chop, slide, chop, slide. But the room was not quiet. The main hall, once a basketball court, had been converted into the interim council chamber. On one side of the long tables sat the human delegation, the mayor, the city council, and a terrifyingly stiff general from the United Nations who insisted on wearing his dress uniform despite the humidity. On the other side sat the Fenrir commander Skara Tern, now wearing the robes of a high diplomat over her armor, and 2 of her lieutenants, and, in the middle, eating sticky buns, were the people of New Seattle. "The logistical parameters for the orbital dock are unacceptable," the UN general, a man named Sterling, grumbled, pushing a map across the table. "You cannot park a Class 4 frigate that close to the Space Needle. The radiation signature interferes with our air traffic control." Skara leaned forward. She didn't growl, but the air in the room seemed to vibrate with her annoyance. "General Sterling, our frigates run on dark matter containment. The only radiation they emit is heat. Your air traffic control is using technology from 3 centuries ago. We are doing you a favor by parking close enough to boost your signal." "It is a violation of airspace sovereignty," Sterling snapped. "It is a parking spot," Skara countered. The tension rose. Hands drifted toward holstered weapons, the humans to their sidearms, the wolves to their shock batons. Adrian sighed. He wiped his hands on his apron, grabbed a tray, and walked out into the hall. "Break time," Adrian announced. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the argument instantly. He set a steaming tureen of chowder in the center of the map. "Clam chowder," Adrian said. "New England style, heavy cream, smoked bacon, potatoes. Eat." General Sterling looked at the soup, then at Adrian. "Mr. Locke, we are in the middle of a delicate geopolitical negotiation regarding—" "Eat the soup, General," Adrian said, his tone mild, but leaving 0 room for debate. "Or you can go negotiate in the parking lot in the rain." Skara picked up a spoon immediately. She had learned quickly that Adrian's food was not just nutrition. It was clarity. She took a bite, closed her eyes, and hummed a deep, resonant sound in her chest. "The bacon is aggressive," Skara noted approvingly. "Like a good ambush." Sterling looked around, realized he was outnumbered by hungry wolves and exhausted staffers, and picked up his spoon. He took a bite. The creaminess, the warmth, the salt had hit him. His shoulders dropped 3 inches. The scowl vanished. "Fine," Sterling mumbled, reaching for a bread roll. "Maybe we can designate a parking orbit 10 kilometers higher, Would that satisfy the docking protocols? That is acceptable, Skara agreed, reaching for the butter. Adrian watched them for a moment, then turned back to the kitchen. He felt a hand on his arm. It was Elena. She looked tired, but it was good. The dark circles under her eyes were gone, replaced by a brightness that made her look 10 years younger. She was wearing a blazer over a t-shirt that said, "I survived the wolf apocalypse and all I got was this soup," merchandise Mira had printed and sold to raise money for the repairs. "You are good at that," Elena whispered, leaning against the doorframe. "You realize they are terrified of you, right?" "They are terrified of the cook," Adrian scoffed, picking up a towel. "I'm just the guy who feeds them." "No, Adrian," Elena said, her voice dropping lower. "They aren't terrified of the cook. They are terrified of the bondkeeper. They treat this kitchen like a temple because they think if they upset you, you might accidentally turn their brains inside out with a stray thought." Adrian flinched. He hated that title. Bondkeeper. Since the battle. Since the moment he had connected the fleet to the collective memory of their species. The Fenrir had looked at him with a religious awe that made his skin crawl. They bowed when he passed. They left offerings of rare metals and strange, glowing fruits at the back door. "I'm just a guy," Adrian muttered, attacking a carrot with unnecessary force. "I got lucky. The atmospheric conditions were right. The stress triggered a dormant psionic spike. Dr. Aris said it was a 1 in a million fluke." "Dr. Aris is a biologist, not a mystic," Elena said gently. "And you know it wasn't a fluke. Skara requested a private session tonight. The High Elders are beaming in from the homeworld. They want to talk to you, and Mira." Adrian froze. The knife hovered over the cutting board. "Mira?" he asked, his voice sharp. "Why Mira?" "Because," Elena said, reaching out to steady his hand. "Yesterday, Kale cut his finger in the loading dock. He didn't say a word. But Mira, who was upstairs in her room playing video games, started bleeding from her index finger at the exact same moment." Adrian dropped the knife. It clattered loudly on the steel table. "It's starting," he whispered, a look of profound, old fear crossing his face. "I thought I hoped it stopped with me." The meeting took place on the roof garden, under the light of the full moon and the soft, blue glow of the Fenrir flagship hovering in the upper atmosphere. It was a private gathering, just Adrian, Elena, Skara, and a holographic projection of 3 Fenrir elders, ancient, white-furred beings draped in ceremonial fabrics that seemed to float in zero gravity. And Mira. She sat on a bench next to Kale. The young wolf warrior looked anxious, his ears swiveling at every sound, his body angled to shield her. Mira, however, looked calm. Too calm. She held a small, glowing crystal in her lap, a psychometric resonator the elders had sent down. The crystal was pulsing with a soft, rhythmic light that matched her heartbeat. "The resonance is undeniable," one of the elders spoke. His voice was a rasp of static, translated by the floating drone. "The child carries the echo. It is faint, unlike the father's roar, but it is pure." "She is 16, Adrian said, stepping in front of her. "She is a human teenager. She likes loud music and hates homework. She is not a vessel for your history." "She is the daughter of Rhea," Skara said softly, stepping out of the shadows. "Did you think that bloodline would simply vanish, Adrian?" Adrian turned on her. "You promised me, Skara. You said if I helped stop the war, my family would be left alone. I promised you safety," Skara corrected. "I did not promise you ignorance. The time for secrets is over, Bondkeeper." She used the title again. This time, it carried the weight of a formal accusation. "Tell them," Skara said, looking Adrian in the eye. "Tell the chieftain Elena. Tell your daughter. Tell them why the soup worked. Tell them why Hadric came here specifically to kill you." Adrian looked at Elena. She was watching him with that same steady, unwavering trust she had shown in the rain. Then he looked at Mira. She wasn't scared. She looked curious. She looked ready. Adrian slumped, the fight draining out of him. He walked to the edge of the roof and looked out at the city lights reflecting off the dark ocean. "It wasn't just language lessons," Adrian began, his voice low. 15 years ago on the Orion platform. Rhea didn't just teach me how to speak Fenrir. She taught me how to feel." He turned back to face them. "The Treaty of Orion wasn't a document. Fenrir doesn't trust paper. Paper burns. Digital files can be corrupted. For the peace to be real, they demanded a collateral, a living record." "A bondkeeper," Skara supplied. "Yes," Adrian nodded. "A biological storage drive for the emotional core of the agreement. Someone who would hold the shared memory of the war, the pain of the humans. The grief of the wolves, so that neither side could ever claim it didn't happen. It was supposed to be a council of 12. 6 humans, 6 Fenrir." He swallowed hard. "But the human delegation refused. They thought it was primitive witchcraft. They wouldn't let their diplomats undergo the neural bridging ritual. The talks were collapsing. The war was going to restart the next morning." Elena gasped softly. "So you volunteered." "I was a junior attaché," Adrian said with a bitter laugh. "I was nobody. But I was in love with Rhea. And she was the candidate for the Fenrir side. She told me that if the bond wasn't made, her fleet would burn Earth. So we did it, just the two of us. In secret, in her quarters. The night before the signing." He touched his chest, right over his heart. "It wasn't just a ceremony. It was a surgery of the soul. We drank the nectar of memory. We opened our minds to each other. We became the vessel. I took the Fenrir sorrow. She took the human fear. We balanced it." "But Rhea died," Mira whispered, her eyes wide. "She was assassinated," Adrian said, his voice cracking. "The extremists found out. They killed her to break the bond. They thought if the Fenrir half died, the human half would go insane and the peace would shatter. And they were almost right. When she died, I felt it. I felt half my soul get ripped away. It almost killed me." He looked at Skara. "I ran. I hid. I blocked it all out. I built walls in my mind so thick I thought nothing could get through. I buried the bondkeeper deep down and became just a cook, because every time I accessed that power, I felt her dying again." "But the soup," Elena said, putting the pieces together. "Cooking was the only way I could let a little bit of it out safely," Adrian admitted. "Emotion, memory, love. I put it in the food because I couldn't keep it inside. But when the fleet arrived, when the threat was real, the walls broke. The heart broth wasn't magic. Elena, it was me. It was 15 years of suppressed grief and the collective memory of an entire alien race. Amplified through a pot of turkey stock." Skara stepped forward. "Hadric knew. The High Command knew there was a surviving keeper. They called you the rot in the system. They believed that as long as a human held the sacred memories of Fenris, we would be weak. Hadric came to cut the cancer out. He didn't just want to conquer Earth. He wanted to lobotomize his own conscience." The silence on the roof was absolute. The wind tugged at Adrian's clothes. "So I am not a hero," Adrian said, looking at his daughter. "I am a fugitive living on stolen time. Holding a ghost inside my head." Mira stood up. She walked over to her father. She placed the glowing crystal on the railing. Then she took his hand. "You aren't a fugitive, Dad," Mira said firmly. "You're the backup drive." Adrian blinked, a startled laugh escaping him. "The backup drive?" "Yeah," Mira shrugged, though her eyes were shining. "The system crashed. Rhea died. The network went down, but you kept the data safe. You kept us safe. That's not stealing. That's what a dad does. She looked at Cale, then back to Adrian. And now I have it too, the resonance. A little, Adrian said, because you were born from the bond. You are the bridge. Mira, literally. Cool, Mira said. She didn't look terrified. She looked determined. So, do I get cool armor like Cale? Or do I have to wear the apron? The tension broke. The elders in the hologram seemed to ripple with what might have been amusement. The path of the keeper is not one of armor, the lead elder intoned. It is the path of the hearth. But perhaps a uniform can be arranged. Later that night, after the elders had logged off and Mira had gone downstairs to debrief Cale, which mostly involved teaching him how to make s'mores in the microwave, Adrian remained on the roof. Elena came out with 2 mugs of cocoa. She handed him one and stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder. That was a lot, Elena said. I'm sorry, Adrian said, looking into his mug. I should have told you sooner. About Rhea, about the ritual. I know it's a lot to ask someone to accept. Being with me means being with a man who is technically part alien ghost library. Adrian, Elena said. She turned to face him. Look at me. He looked. Her eyes were dark and serious. Do you still love her? She asked. It was the question that had to be asked. Yes, Adrian answered honestly. I will always love her. She is part of my neural pathways. She is the mother of my child. I can't cut that out. Good, Elena said. I don't want you to. Adrian looked surprised. If you didn't love her, you wouldn't be the man who cooked that soup, Elena said. You wouldn't be the man who stood between an army and a city. Your grief shaped you, Adrian. It made you kind. It made you deep. She reached up and touched his face, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw. I am not jealous of a ghost. Adrian, she saved you then. I want to be with you now. I don't need you to forget the past. I just need you to make room for the future. Can you do that? Adrian closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. He reached out with his mind tentatively, carefully, and checked the internal landscape of his soul. The storm was gone. The grief was there. Yes, like a stone in a river. But the water was flowing around it. And there was new space, warm space, space for Elena. Yes, Adrian whispered. There is room, a lot of it. Good, Elena smiled. She pulled him down for a kiss. Not desperate like the one in the rain, but slow, deliberate, and full of promise. Because I have a lot of plans for this city, and I'm going to need a partner who can handle high-stress negotiations and make a decent risotto. I can do the risotto, Adrian murmured against her lips. The negotiations might cost you extra. I'll pay in back rubs in silence, Elena promised. Deal. 1 year later, the second annual Unity Thanksgiving was not held in the community center. It wouldn't fit. It was held on the reclaimed promenade of the new Seattle waterfront, a massive stretch of parkland that ran parallel to the newly reinforced seawall. The sky was a brilliant, crisp blue. The autumn leaves were turning gold and red, matching the banners that hung from every lamppost, banners depicting a stylized bowl and a wolf's paw clasping a human hand. The crowd was a sea of diversity. 50,000 humans mixed with 5,000 Fenrir, who had been granted shore leave or permanent residency. The smell was incredible. It was a symphony of roasting turkeys, cranberry sauce, pumpkin pies, and the smoky, spicy aroma of carcass, a Fenrir delicacy of slow, roasted heavy ox meat that Skara had insisted on adding to the menu. At the head of the longest table, a table that seemed to stretch for a mile, stood a massive cauldron. Adrian Locke stood behind it. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He wasn't wearing robes. He was wearing his old gray sweater and a new apron that Mira had embroidered with the words Chef Supreme, Galaxy Defender. He looked older, but the lines of stress were gone from his face. He looked settled. Elena stood beside him, looking radiant in a wool coat, holding a clipboard but clearly not working. She was laughing at something Skara was saying. Skara Tern, the hero of the Reformation, wore a formal dress uniform, but she had woven autumn flowers into the fur of her mane. She looked less like a weapon and more like a guardian. And there was Mira. She was 17 now, taller, wearing a jacket that was a hybrid of human denim and Fenrir kinetic weave. She stood next to Kale, who had grown into his frame and was now the official liaison for the youth integration program. They were holding hands openly, ignoring the cameras. "Attention!" Elena's voice rang out over the PA system. The crowd quieted down. The chatter of thousands of voices, human and alien, faded into a respectful silence. "We have a lot of speeches scheduled," Elena said, winking at the mayor. "But we decided to skip them, because a wise man once told me that you can't talk peace on an empty stomach." Cheering erupted, a mix of clapping and deep, resonant barks. "The tradition stands," Elena said, "before the turkey, before the treaties. We start with the soup, the bowl that broke the sword." She turned to Adrian. "Chef." Adrian stepped up to the microphone. He looked out at the sea of faces. He saw former enemies sharing bread. He saw Fenrir pups chasing human children through the piles of leaves. He saw the fleet in the sky, not menacing, but watchful. He felt the bond within him. It was quiet today. It was content. "There is no secret ingredient," Adrian said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "It's just bone and root and thyme. It's the things we all have, the things we all share." He picked up the ladle. "The soup is served," Adrian announced. "Eat, and remember." As the volunteers, humans and wolves working side by side, began to distribute the thousands of bowls, a sound started. It began with Kyle. He threw his head back and let out a long, low note. Then Mira joined him, her human voice harmonizing with his growl. Then Skara. Then the entire Fenrir contingent. And then the humans joined in. It wasn't a perfect howl. It was a messy, joyous, chaotic roar of celebration, a song of survival. Adrian stood back, watching them. He felt a hand slip into his. Elena squeezed his fingers. On his other side, Mira leaned her head on his shoulder. Adrian looked up at the sky. He thought of Rhea. He didn't feel the sharp stab of loss anymore. He just felt a warm, golden echo, like sunlight breaking through clouds. "We did it," he thought to her. "The table is set." He smiled, lifted his own bowl, and took a sip. It tasted like hope. Thou end.